This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
In this episode of Leap Forward, we speak with Robert Hazelwood, Non-Executive Director at Citygate Automotive and 40-year veteran of the automotive industry. We explore how dealerships are blending digital innovation with personal service, why human connections still drive sales, and what the future holds as electric vehicles and online retail transform the business. From leading major brands to advising today's startups, Robert shares hard-won insights for professionals rewriting the playbook. So I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Robert Hazelwood, who's a non-exec director of Citygate. Robert, thank you so much for joining Leap Forward. It's really great to have you here.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
So first off, briefly introduce us to Citygate. You know, what's the value prop, and as a non-exec, what role do you play?
Okay, so the group's a really interesting group. It's completely privately owned, been up and running, I suppose, plus 15 years. The owner-driver was one of the very early sponsored retailers for the Volkswagen Group. So Jonathan Smith, a super guy, he initially was a regional director with HR Owen, and then had the opportunity to become one of, as I say, Volkswagen's early sponsored retailers. Unlike most sponsored retailers in those days who would pick up one Volkswagen dealership, John ended up taking on 4. So from day one, he more than enough had his hands full. And over, I say, about 15 years now, he gradually added various additional dealerships to the group. He's grown the turnover to about 420, maybe 420 million plus at the moment. It's a really interesting group. It's geographically very condensed. So if you drove up the A1 or the M4 coming out of London, is that northwest pizza slice. And he's got 15 plus dealerships, predominantly Volkswagen Group. So he's got Seat, Cupra, Skoda, Volkswagen commercial vehicles. And he's now just grown with a couple of non-Volkswagen Group brands. So he's now grown or added to the portfolio 3 Kia sites, and also a Aura dealership as well. So it's a really, I say, nicely condensed, geographically condensed, franchise and portfolio condensed in terms of the number of brands that they operate. But it's a very owner-driven business that really does try and excel in every respect to deliver just great customer satisfaction and great brand reputation for the brands that they represent. I've known John for, it goes back well over 20 years in the Volkswagen Group world, but I even knew him before that when he was a car salesman for a Citroen dealership, and I was the national franchising manager at Citroen UK. So we've known each other for a very long time. And I guess coming back, how did I get involved? I've been talking to John on and off over the quite a few years. I came back from Dubai, having run a distribution business out in Dubai, just around the time of the COVID lockdowns, and post the COVID period, we started chatting. He said, "Would I like to come on the board as a non-exec?" I suppose where I suppose work very closely with John is a lot of my experience in the industry is manufacturer based, so I can give him some guidance, advice, and thoughts and ideas around how OEMs work, and really, I suppose, act as a bit of a sounding board in any strategic discussions that he's looking to have. But he's a great guy to work with, and I've enjoyed 3-4 years in the non-exec space.
Fascinating. And so we all know that the path is never linear as such. And you just mentioned there Dubai. Tell us a little bit about, I suppose, your journey to date, and bring it to life. Tell us some stories along the way.
Okay, so I'm now in my 43rd year in the industry. Came into the industry as a graduate trainee in 1982 with Peugeot Talbot. Now, you ask people today, have you ever heard of the Talbot franchise? They'd have no idea. So I started as a grad trainee there, had a really good time. It was a fascinating time in the industry then, with, I suppose, a lot more traditional brands. We've seen so much change over the last, 30, 40 years, and certainly over the last 10 years with lots and lots of new brands. But certainly in that period, it was a very traditionally based industry, I guess. Peugeot was trying hard to get to 7-8% market share, I guess. And my kind of grad trainee entrance into the industry was a very traditional role that car manufacturers used to do in those days. So I spent a year going around all the various departments, spending time in after sales, in parts, in sales promotions, marketing, regional office, etc. And then after that time, I got my very first posting as the regional administrator for the central region. Another thing that was interesting, I guess, in those days is lots of companies had lots and lots of regional offices. And I worked out of the Leamington Spa regional office in my first year, I guess, in the industry. And then again, I suppose typical to lots of people in that era, I moved on to being a zone sales manager. And I had the pleasure of running for Peugeot, the Lake District and Northern Lancashire. And this was in the days of pre-mobile phones. So you'd literally, drive up into the Lake District and get lost for a few days, and nobody could ever contact you. So very, very fortunate. It was an interesting time, and certainly, I guess the lessons that I learned in those those days were very, very formative in terms of how OEMs used to work with car dealers and how the dealership relationship was. In those days, as a zone sales manager, you'd have your patch and you'd spend the first 2 weeks of every month wholesaling cars. So, as a young 24-year-old, I was sitting in front of dealers negotiating. I'll give you a few more Peugeot 205s if you'd like to take a few more Talbot Horizons. And you'd spend 2 weeks literally going around all the dealerships on your patch, selling them cars. No computers, you'd have a spreadsheet. And you'd go down, you'd be ticking the ones off that they'd agreed to take. And then the second 2 weeks of the month, you'd spend your time trying to convince them how they could sell the cars that you'd wholesale them in the first 2 weeks. So I've got to say, it was a fantastic intro into the retail side of the business. And I would say an invaluable role to really getting to understand kind of end to end how the industry worked. And I guess in every facet of my career, I've always learnt those or remembered those lessons in terms of just how critical that relationship is with retailers, and really how you can get very close to understanding what the consumer or customer is looking for, and how to build very much a proactive and participative relationship. And I do smile a little bit today when I've seen what we've seen over the last few years with various manufacturers going to agency, and what appears now to be very much a full reverse move by most manufacturers away from the agency program. Because I think in some respects, whilst there were some valid reasons why OEMs might want to go down that approach or take that approach, I don't think in many cases they really got in close enough to the detail of what role dealers do provide in that end-to-end service. So I had a fantastic time there. I then moved on to Fiat. The reason I went to Fiat was that I'd done an Italian degree and spoke fluent Italian. And I thought, well, there's not very much opportunity ever to use Italian in this industry, and Fiat offered an opportunity. So had the pleasure of running a couple of zones for Fiat. But then very quickly noticed that unless I was really going to go across to the factory, there wasn't really going to be that much need for an Italian-speaking zone manager in the Fiat UK operation. But I was very fortunate then to be offered my first management job at 27 to go and join Citroën to run their franchising department. And at the age of 27, I had my first management role, managing a team of 5 franchising managers. And our job at that era was very much, I suppose, births, marriages, and deaths. So we appointed dealers, we got involved in any acquisitions and mergers, etc., and we also terminated dealers as well. So again, what was, I think, very fortunate for me was I was immersed very early on in spending a lot of time with the business management team, going through all the dealer composites, doing 3-year projections for new prospective dealers, and again, really getting into understanding the whole retail business. I mean, when you had to sit down with prospective Citroën dealers and work out a 3-year viability, it was a very serious job that you were taking on board, to try and convince them that that's where they were going to put all of their real estate capital for the future, really. I then had a fascinating opportunity to go and join the brand newly established Nissan GB. And this was really fascinating because Nissan Japan had just terminated the relationship with Nissan UK and effectively dispensed with the services of Octave Botner. And again, if you're old enough as I am in the industry, he was absolutely a legend in the industry who'd set up his own import business in the UK. He actually achieved, I think, about 150,000 sales of Nissans or Datsuns as they were in that era. And interestingly, when you look at how lots of car manufacturers have looked at how they look at the whole integration of an end-to-end supply agreement, Botner in that era had done everything. So he established his own retail group of about 200 dealerships. He's got his own finance company. He'd sorted out logistics. Now, he was decades ahead of his time. And Nissan Japan sacked him and set up their own wholly owned subsidiary in the UK. And that was I've got to say, a really exciting time in that I came in to run the southern region for them. And it was a time really putting a whole brand new business together, sorting out a new network, and effectively putting the whole team together and everything. So really exciting, interesting time there, and got a lot of fond memories of working with some really talented people in the UK. And then I was offered at the age of 37 my first MD's position, and that was to go and work for the Inchcape Group as managing director of Mazda France. And I said to the group CEO at the time, well, I don't speak French and I don't know anything about Mazda, and I've never lived in France. And his comment at the time is, yeah, but you're a linguist, you speak Italian, that'll kind of do. And before I knew it, I was taking the family over to Paris to spend 2.5 years running the Mazda franchise. I guess one of the funniest moments I had, I was again very, very, very blessed to pick up some really talented guys in the team over there. But they, in a paradoxical way, the best thing that happened was that my commercial director left about a month after I joined, and I then had to get involved in the direct sales management of the business. And with O-level French, that wasn't massively easy. So I was on an accelerated curve in terms of understanding the language. But as I immediately immersed myself in really getting to know the country, the language, the dealers. We had about 120 dealers, and in 2.5 years, I think I saw 80% of them. So I personally went out and visited 80% of them. But I then appointed an ex-Fiat regional director who had been an ex-Marine in the French Navy and spoke no English. So it was the best thing I ever did, because apart from the fact that he was a super guy, but the best thing was that we then had to do all the business meetings in French rather than English, because he couldn't understand any English. So that quickly got me into understanding French, a lot quicker. And I suppose the funniest moment was at the end of the first year, we had our national dealer conference, and I wanted to present in French. So I had a fantastic, completely bilingual PA. So I said, well, I'll write my script in English. You can translate it into French, and then we'll practice it. So I wrote what I wanted to say. She translated it. I tried to present it back in awful French, and I said, this really isn't going to work. So I went away that weekend, and I effectively franglaid it and wrote it in the way that the French would pronounce it, but in the way that I was reading it. So phonetically, how I would say the words at that time, because my French was rubbish, really, at that stage. And on the morning of the conference, I had to have a very early morning breakfast meeting with the worldwide sales director of Mazda, a big American Texan guy. And I didn't have time to do a rehearsal. So I said to my after sales director, a guy who spoke very, very good English, I said, listen, if you can do the run through for me before and just make sure the timings are right and everything's okay, because I've got to go off now to the sales meeting. And when I came back, he came rushing up to me and he said, Robert, we have a major problem. I said, well, what's that then? He said, well, you'll never be able to read this French. I said, don't worry, that's how I'll read it. I was pleased at the end that after 2.5 years, my personal kind of claim to fame was I presented at the Paris Motor Show to the press in French. So I was quite pleased with that.
That's really incredible. You just have already shared so many great parallels and parables, I think, in a sense, right? You markets, kind of language. You've gone from sort of manufacturer, the dealer relationship. I mean, what an incredible kind of career to date. And of course, that's not the end of it, right? I believe there's. So what happened next after the Paris Motor Show presentation?
Yeah, I came back to the UK and got involved with Inchcape Retail, and within 2 to 3 months, I'd been made up to CEO of Inchcape Retail, and had the pleasure of running the retail group of, at that stage, it was about 55 dealerships, about $1 billion turnover and about 3,000 people. And had the pleasure, of working with some very talented guys in the UK retail business, dealing with lots of different manufacturers. We had about 15 brands at that stage. And it was the two old businesses of Wadham Kenning, Wadham Stringer, and Man Edgerton that were folded together under the new Inchcape Retail business. Within 12 months, I was then given responsibility also for the leasing and fleet management companies. I had to fold those together and make them into one unit and relocate them down to Portsmouth. And I also had responsibility for Automotive. Now, that was an online, I suppose you'd say, sales lead generation business that Inchcape had the UK rights to, that was a complete disaster and was losing £1 million a year. So I had the pleasure of working on that one for a while. So stayed with Inchcape then, and then was asked by the then CEO whether I would manage the effectively the handback of the distribution and sales businesses for Inchcape of the Ferrari and Maserati franchises, because they'd been terminated under the big pan-European reorganisation that Ferrari put in place. And we were the UK distributor and the Belgian distributor for both brands. So I spent 18 months back and forth to Maranello and Modena, doing the various negotiations, and playing about with some very nice product. So that's where the Italian came in again, luckily, because I could sit in meetings. I didn't tell them initially that I spoke Italian. I just sat there and listened to them Italian talking about us for a while. But then they clocked, because I was obviously looking far too intently and jotting too many notes down. But had a fascinating 18 months. Had the pleasure of sitting with Luca de Montezemolo several times for dinner, and got involved with. At that time, it was Michael Schumacher's period when he was just winning just about every Grand Prix, every other weekend. So it was a really exciting time for the Ferrari brand. My disappointment was that I always knew they were going to set up a UK operation, and I was effectively managing my own exit from the business because I knew they'd bring in one of their own to run it. And at that stage, I decided to leave the Inchcape Group because I didn't for family reasons. My kids were getting to a certain age where I thought I needed to be around a little bit more. So I decided to leave Inchcape, and within about 2 weeks got a phone call for a UK managing director role, which in the end turned out not to be who I thought it was, but it turned out to be MG Rover. So I then had 5 months up in Longbridge trying to hold on to a business that was very clearly going bust. If there's anything you learn, or anything I've learned in my industry experiences, when a business is going bust, you learn more in 5 months there than you probably would in 5 years in any other easy business. But I also always remark to people that, again, this is where the strength of a dealer relationship comes out. In the year that the business, or the year end that the business went bust, in the following April, I think it was April, May, MG Rover, with a massively depleted and not very good range of models, clearly very, very, very out of step with modern, German product, etc. They sold 79,000 cars in the UK. And that was all down to the team in MG Rover working really, really closely with their dealers. And the dealers were massively, passionate, and were trying really hard to keep the whole business afloat. So that was I'd say an interesting period. Then about 7-8 months out of business, I took a summer, long extended summer vacation period, and then was fortunate to have a chat with a super chap, Robin Woolcock, who was then the Group MD of Volkswagen Group, and he offered me a job to come and join them in Milton Keynes with Volkswagen Group. He was very honest. He said, I don't have a job for you yet, but I will be at some stage. He was obviously doing things in the background. So I joined the board probably for 2 months with a couple of projects to manage, and then was offered the job of running commercial vehicles. And I said to Robin at the time, I don't really know a great deal on vans, really. And he said, well, don't worry, that's where I started. So, well, I'll follow his lead then. And I got to say, I had a really, really exciting couple of years running the CB franchise. And again, an interesting comment that I always remember, because I try to get out, meet all the dealers and get to as many customer events as I could. I always remember very good, fairly large firm of plumbers who only ran Volkswagen vans. And I said, well, why do you run Volkswagen brands? He said, well, in the nicest possible way. He said, if I turn up, and he said, in either a Fiat or a Citroen van, he said the end user might think that I'm not going to do a good enough job. He said, if I turn up in a Mercedes van, they think that I'm going to probably rip them off in terms of price. He said, if I turn up in a Volkswagen van, they think I'm going to do a good quality German job, but not charge them too much. And, we spend hours and hours and hours, certainly as manufacturers and retailers, talking about brand. And in a concise 30-second conversation, that was a customer summing up a brand. Yeah. So I had a a really enjoyable couple of years running commercial vehicles. But I'd said to Robin previously that if a car brand came up, I'd be very, very keen. And an opportunity came up to run Skoda UK. And I have to say, it's possibly my entire period in the industry, the best brand that I've ever had experience of. And the reason that was again, for lots and lots of reasons, but first of all, it was still perceived by a certain age as being the joke brand. So whenever you made jokes about cars that had gone wrong, it was always with the tagline, "It's a Skoda." And what we were doing at that stage was massively moving this size and scale, but also, I suppose, the respectability of the brand. And the product was outstanding. The team in Mladá Boleslav in the Czech Republic were just fantastic engineers, massively passionate, very, very proactive, very respectful. They were just great people to work with. And I was very fortunate to inherit and develop a team in the UK that also shared all of that same passion. And again, to put in the dealer link, we had some fantastic retailers who were just so passionate about the customer relationship. And those retailers coined their own phrase, actually, when they were talking about how close they could get to their customers. It's something that I definitely never ever kind of forgot, just how they would do anything for a customer. So we had a brand that was increasingly getting new product, was well engineered. The dealers were obsessed about customer loyalty. They called it the human touch, which was a great phrase, which ironically we, the manufacturer or the national sales company, then borrowed. I think that came from a retailer in Leeds, Doodle Keith, who's still there today. And I think that was his phrase that he'd actually, so I'd been told he actually coined the phrase in the first instance. So fantastic brand, really interesting. But then was offered the job to go and run the biggest and for Volkswagen, certainly the most important brand that they had in their portfolio, which was the Volkswagen brand in the UK. And had 2.5 years working with a very different network, a very different team, a very different manufacturer, a very hard, challenging brand in lots of respects, but thoroughly enjoyed it. And as I say, did that for 2.5 years. Excuse me. But then had the opportunity to do something completely bonkers and well off my radar, was to go and join an ex-colleague of mine who was then effectively about to become the CEO of BCA. And I joined him and became the UK managing director for BCA Marketplace. So I had a year in the auctions, which was, again, a fascinating insight. After that, 2.5 years running a automotive consultancy business with 200 people in the UK, so very much on the other side of the fence, selling programs to manufacturers and retailers. Owned by DECRA, who were, or still are today, one of the biggest testing companies in the world, a German company, and with absolutely fantastic, really, really nice people to work with. And thought I was probably going to see out my career at that stage, but got an opportunity to, as I say, this is a long way of closing the loop. I'm back to Dubai. So I ended up going to run the Mercedes-Benz, Alfa Romeo, GAC, a Chinese brand, distribution business in Dubai. We're also the sixth rent-a-car operator as well for the UK. For the UAE. And had nearly 3 years out in Dubai. Thoroughly enjoyed the whole experience. But then COVID came and I effectively came back home.
What a career and what a journey. So much perspective that you've obviously have on the sector, through that being every side, it feels like, and almost every brand you seem to have kind of engaged with as well along the way. So talking about where we are now as an industry, kind of what's your kind of perspective? What do you see as being the kind of the key? Where are we? What are the key challenges? And also, what are the opportunities that you see for us?
So it's interesting. I often reflect with colleagues about my time in the industry. I think in the early years it was a lot more simple. I think a lot more straightforward. A lot of what you did was you went from A to B and just kind of headed on. I think you needed people who were capable, commercial, in not necessarily intellectually smart, but in intelligent and commercially smart. But most of what you were doing was fairly transactional and fairly straightforward. You could set fairly straightforward objectives. We're now in an industry that is very, very much more complex. And we'll talk about digital maybe in a little bit more detail, because I'm now running a software business for the Citygate Holdings Group, which I'd like to just mention in a second. But so we're no longer in a physical world. We're in a physical and a digital world, which makes it slightly more complex. A number of manufacturers have tried non-traditional dealer strategies to go to market. So you've got some, still today, you've got some completely agency-based models. You've got some hybrid-based models. So that's slightly different. We work in an age where you can't just push information out to consumers anymore. They take the information when they want it, whatever time and in whatever means. So the way of maximizing your marketing spend has become so much more complicated as well. Customers are very different today than they were in the old days, where they'd, on a weekend, they'd go into 5, 6, 7 dealerships and have a look at different cars, talk to lots of salespeople, etc. Now it's probably less than one visit per purchase. I haven't seen any, very latest information, but it's certainly had got down to about 1.2 visits per purchase. So much more of the car purchase, whether that be new or used, is now done in a very, very different way at different times by people who are wanting information very differently. So I think in a whole host of different ways, the industry has become more challenging, difficult, and for lots of people coming into the industry, I suppose more difficult to navigate in lots of respects. Where I think the real opportunities lie is, in a way, is going back to absolute basics and focusing on what is it the customer's really looking for. And I think often we get very, very worked up around technology, and a bit like the old days where we used to talk about features and benefits. I think lots of people will talk about technology without talking about what is that really doing for the consumer. And I think the opportunities for our industry is providing the right product at the right time, with in the right manner that the customer wants that either that information or whatever. But it's still getting back to the same basics. So you have to understand your customer's needs. And I think you need people who are interfacing, or people and or technology that's interfacing, that is providing that consistency of delivery. So I think there are massive opportunities if we use the latest technology to really help us further understand consumer desires. And I think what we have seen, and frankly, why lots of manufacturers are now reverting for the moment back to a more traditional dealer model, is that they've now come to appreciate the role that retailers do in that whole transaction. And certainly the desire from consumers to do lots and lots of stuff online, digitally, but also lots of stuff they actually want to sit in front of a car salesman or a car sales manager and have a discussion and build a relationship and feel reassured that if anything goes wrong, they know where they can bring this car back to. So I think the opportunities lie in choosing the right technology and adapting it to really what the consumer requirements are, and not just for technology's sake. I think there's lots and lots of the industry is just full of people with software programs and apps and things which, sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not massively useful, but they've had some VC spend behind them, and they've developed something which is frankly very expensive, but not actually very useful in very many respects. So I think it's more complex. I think it's more difficult to navigate. But I think if you still have, we had a phrase at Volkswagen for one of our conferences where we talked about a blended retailing strategy, and it was bricks, clicks, and people. And I think the brands that are getting this really correct at the moment are still amalgamating those three elements. So they've got the right facilities, they've got the right environments where consumers can come, feel very comfortable, can get a test drive of a vehicle. But they also then have great technology and, crucially, really, really good people. And I think if you get that blend of the three elements, then I think you can go far in this industry. But I think there are some people who think you can do it with just one or two of those elements, and you can't. In my personal mind, it's very, very clear you need great people. I think we're still a physically based environment because, unlike banking, where they obviously went fully digital a long time ago, we still have a big product that needs parking somewhere, displaying, whatever. So I still think there's a physical element there, and there's definitely a big technology play as well.
Let's talk about the people thing, because it's really interesting. You've come from kind of being a graduate from kind of Peugeot Toolbook back in the day. You talked about the human touch, which I love, by the way. Let's unpack the people thing for a little bit. So tell me, how do you find great people? How do you make great people? So give me your view on that.
So I think I think there's an old saying, isn't there, that you can train people on skills, but you can't really train people on behaviours and overall personal competencies. I was involved in a recruitment day when I was in Skoda, and we were seeing about 20 odd people, and a number of the various brand people were there looking for new appointments, and I was looking for a sales director. And I started off the day by saying, whatever happens, I'm not having somebody who has no automotive retail experience. Not you could do that in certain roles, but in sales, you can't do it. And by the end of the day, I said, I want this guy. And the very, very smart HR lady who was with me said, and you're the person who at the start of the day didn't want anybody who had no automotive experience. And I said, yeah, and I've seen this guy. He's going to be fantastic. We can train him in automotive in several months. He, in fact, he's set up his own business, which isn't in automotive, but he finished up his career as sales and marketing vice president for Volkswagen, selling 450,000 Volkswagens in the US market, and that guy came to that recruitment day with no automotive experience whatsoever. But what I saw in him that day was a big brain, intellectually very, very, very smart, but commercially also very, very, I say not moldable, but he was very, very prepared to listen, to understand things, be prepared to. He wasn't the guy who'd be in a room shouting things and listening to the sound of his own voice. He sat there very, very quiet, did lots of listening. Within 6 months, he was on stage presenting at one of our events, and it was as if he'd been in the industry 30, 40 years. So my I guess my personal view on people is it's about the personal qualities. In particular, it's about energy, enthusiasm, and positivity. I've struggled to work with people who moan, who are not positive, and who can, with every issue there's a problem rather than an opportunity. And I've got to say, I've been very, very fortunate enough to have inherited, but also then to recruit over my time in the industry some really, really bright, talented people who the difference they made was in their personal characteristics. So determination, prepared to, as I say, prepared to work with people, prepared to be flexible, prepared to still be very dogged and passionate about the business. But people who, at any time during the day or night, you could phone them and they'd still be massively enthusiastic and positive. And that's made the difference in all of the teams that I've been with, really. I think the job of a manager, of a leader, is to get a very, very clear strategy, to map out what the vision is of the business, but then to surround yourself with really good people who are very competent and who can join in your vision and very much drive it very hard. And I've done that and been very, very successful with quite a lot of businesses, thankfully.
Now, I want to go to the technology piece just for a moment. So tell me a little bit about kind of what you're up to with Citygate and what is the power and impact, and I suppose in a sense the future that you sort of see coming through all of the innovation from a tech perspective that's going on.
So it's really interesting that the business that I am now running is a long-established business set up about 12 years ago in the vehicle imaging space. Okay, but the holding company bought this business in June of last year, and it's really simple. If you're sat on your sofa at 11:30 at night, Googling, I'd like to buy a used car or a new car, you look at the advert that crops up, and for a 30, 40, 50,000 pound car, the photography is shockingly awful. And you say, okay, well, I'll flip over that one. I'll go and have a look at one that I can actually see a nice photo on. Our business, effectively, from end to end, provides outstanding vehicle imagery with really relevant vehicle data. And it makes that end result really exciting and engaging. How many poorly photographed and in terms of specification and quality of data is just awful. Then you'll see that the industry really, having learned lots during the COVID era where they didn't see customers face to face, have kind of crept back to a lot of their old bad habits. What we do as a business is that we build and sell turntables, lighting studios, to get really fantastic color perfect quality images. We've got a handheld app if you don't want to invest in a great deal of imagery, in terms of hardware. And we've got some clever software that really makes it time and cost efficient to upload all of this information. So again, where the industry is still at with lots of people is that they'll give the job to a junior salesman, say, go out and photograph the car outside. And he'll go outside into the car park and he'll photograph the car from various odd angles with the light coming down from various angles and poor quality background. And then he'll come in and he'll take the images, whether it's on a SIM card or a photo card, whatever, put it in his computer. He's then got to download all the data, all the specification. And maybe then when he comes to upload it onto AutoTrader or onto the company's website, it might have taken him an hour to do that. Okay. With our technology, end to end, you can have a brand new advert loaded of a vehicle that you photographed 10 minutes ago. One of our partners, a big car supermarket, is imaging 140 cars a day, 150 cars a day. So, we talk about it as the end result being the important thing. And by the way, we've got AI background images that we can drop in. We're also now doing dynamic videos, which are more engaging for the consumer to look at. But we talk about the quality of the images. It's also the quality of the data and getting the relevant specification. Again, going back to this old phrase of features and benefits. You don't want just to download all of the vehicle data from CAP, which is in not at the most, say, consumer friendly manner. You want, when somebody reads it, that they're reading the specification of a car that they understand in terms of vehicle spec. So what we provide is this whole end-to-end solution that massively saves time without any shadow of a doubt. And by the way, it's not our internal data. This is Auto Trader data. If you upload over 20 images of good quality, that is the same as discounting the car by only having 2 or 3 photos and discounting the car. So every time that so on our turntable, as I say, it's completely automated, but the camera takes the photos, 36 photos, doors closed, 36 photos, doors open, a few internal shots. You've then got, over 80 images, which you've done in the space of 5 minutes of footage. By the time you've added the spec together, you've got a really exciting, engaging image or advert already uploaded to Auto Trader or whoever you're selling your cars through. That is, in my simple world, is technology that is really enabling that online journey. We're also now very close to finalising a full online vehicle checkout. So you can effectively, a bit like, dare I say it, the kazoos of this world, where they did have a full end-to-end, buying online perspective. Now, I'm still not in the camp that people will ultimately necessarily go all the way to buying a car online, because I think there are stages where consumers want to do certain other things, like get full value for their part exchange, understand all the details around the finance quote, etc. So I still think there are some people who at that stage will come offline, but they've been supplied with, I call it a vehicle passport. They've got the full details of everything they need to know about that car to go to the next stage.
Amazing.
And that business is called AutoWorks or Auto.works, and is a very, very interesting business that really is enabling a number of car manufacturers, number of leasing companies, and a number of retailers, both new franchise car dealers and used car dealers, go to market digitally in a very cost effective way.
Which is what it's all about at the moment. I've got one last question for you, which is going right back to the beginning. What advice would you give the Robert starting out?
I think very simply, it's a fascinating industry. It's full of fantastic brands. It's full of fantastic cars. We haven't really talked a lot about cars today, but it's full of obviously fantastic technology. It's still today, I think, a very exciting people business. And as I've seen in my career, I suppose there's so much variety in the industry, where it's a very, very broad church in that sense. With, you can go and work in retail all your life, or you could work in retail, manufacturing, working in car auctions. You can have, a very, very varied environment and lifestyle. So I've certainly had 43 years of really exciting and genuinely great times, and would very much highly recommend it to anybody.
Robert, thank you so much for your time today. I could have spoken to you for hours more, but that's all we've got time for right now. But thank you very, very much. I look forward to welcoming you again, perhaps on a future series.
Super, Justin. Thank you very much. My pleasure.